So today is Gittin Daf Lamed Aleph Gittin 31. Today's Daf Yomi. We start with the Mishnah Lamed Aleph 31a. Mishnah is talking about a person who wants to designate a portion of fruit that he has in one place. He says this will be the fruit that I keep separating my truma from when I'm somewhere else. So for the common example is the person's traveling and he's getting fruit there and he wants to take truma from it. So he leaves behind some truma in his house and he's some food in his house. And before he eats, he says, a portion of that food in my house is the truma for this produce. And that's how we keep separating it, moving along. So this is what our Mishnah says. Somebody leaves behind fruits in his house to use them to separate truma and maasros, the tithes for the Kohen and the Levi. Rashi says, well, referring to his somach al elu, he wants to rely upon them, and then eat the other fruit when he's traveling or somewhere else. He says the truma for these fruits I'm separating is amongst those other fruits that I set aside for. And these last three words of Rashi are a little bit intriguing because he says this is what he does all the time. But then we just learned in yesterday's daf that you're only supposed to separate minamuka from the food that's right next to each other, and you're not supposed to do it from far away. So we understand if it's once in a while, it's extenuating circumstance. Rashi says v'chein oset tamid, so he does it all the time. So that requires explanation. So Tosa says he's doing this on Erev Shabbos and Yom Tov, and Tosa says it's possible that it's not minamukaf. He's doing it in a way that it's not from far away on a trip. How is that? Maybe he just has some they're next to each other, but maybe it's not visible for some reason. So it's not the traveler. Anyway, so the continuing along with the Mishnah, he leaves by money to separate it from Meiser Sheni, because you have to bring the secondary tithe to Jerusalem, or you could transfer it onto money. So he leaves the money back in one place, and then he transfers it from there. So how do you know that these fruits have not rotted or the money has not been stolen? So you could separate the food with the assumption that they're still intact. You can assume that the food is still in existence. Im avdu, and if they've been stolen or lost or destroyed, Rebbe Lezer says you have to be concerned for 24 hours, meaning there's a 24-hour period where you have to be concerned. So the Gemara is going to explain what Rebbe Lezer is saying. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so since we're talking about being concerned that the food went bad, there's a special law with respect to wine that we have to take a tithe from the wine. So dagan tirosh v'yitzar, the grain, the wine, and the oil, it's biblically required to take a tithe from. But if the wine turned into vinegar, you can't take truma from vinegar for wine. So Rabbi Yehuda says, b'shlosha prakim botkin esayayin. 3 times a year, you need to check the wine. So you need to check the wine 3 times a year to make sure that it's not turned into vinegar. What are the 3 times? B'kidum shamotzi echag, when the Easter wind blows after the festival, after Sukkot, u'ba'otzos smadar, and when the grapes begin to blossom, u'b'shas kenisas mayim b'boser, and when Rashi offers 2 explanations for this, when the water begins to go into the grape and make it more moist, or else when the grapes begin to crush and they put water into them, and then it becomes vinegar for dipping in it. But these are 3 times a year. We have to check the wine barrel to make sure it's not vinegar. So first, the Gemara addresses the question: "My me'es la'es." What does it mean? Me'es la'es. What does it mean for this past 24-hour period? What does that mean? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Me'es la'es shel badika, that when Rabbi Lezer says you have to be concerned, Me'es la'es, it means from the last time you checked, last time you looked at those fruits and said, oh, they are here and they're valid, You get 24 hours after that to assume it was still good. And after that, you can't rely on it. You have to take another tithe. Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus says, Mishum Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Yanai, me'es shel hanacha. No, it's not the past 24 hours from when you checked, that you don't get 24 hours grace period from when you checked, but it goes back to the first time you did it, the first time you put down the fruits and say, I'm separating these fruits because in the future I'm going to start taking truma from them. After you put them down, you have 24 hours, but after that, you get nothing. And so therefore, you get an initial 24 hours from there. And everything up until then everything from then is no good. So according to the first approach, once you discover it, you could assume that 24 hours before that period, everything was okay. But according to this second approach, once you put it down, you only get 24 hours. That's the difference between the two approaches. And so the Mishnah says, Tananim Avdu Hare. So the Gemara is going to try and bring a proof from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said, Tananim Avdu Hare Zachoshesh Meis Laish. That our Mishnah says that if you lost it, you have concern from 24 hours. Meis Laish. Bishlam Mamdamar Meis Laish Shabadika. Makes sense according to the one from you get 24 hours going backwards from the last time you found it. Shapir, that makes sense. Now, Amanda Amar Meis Laish Nacham, according to the approach, who says you get 24 hours only from once you put it down for the first time. My me'es la'es, why did it say from time to time? Ad me'es la'es, until 24 hours, it should say. Ad me'es la'es, by the way. So cautious. So it's a question on this second approach, and it seems to support the reading of Rabbi Yochanan and not the reason of Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yanai. So now the Gemara says that this approach is the approach of Rabbi Elazar, that even after he finds that he only has to be concerned with Isla, is the position of Rabbi Elazar. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, so the Amor Rabbi Elazar says, Cholken olav chaver of Rabbi Elazar. This position of Rabbi Elazar that we give you 24 hours, and the Gemara seems to say it's 24 hours from the Bedika, that once you discover it, you get 24-hour grace period going backwards. So this argues with the Chaverav, with the Rabbanan who argues with Rabbi Elazar. It's now we go into the Mishnah, and this Mishnah appears cited as at least 3 times in Chas, in Kedushin, in Nida, and Mishnah from Mikvos. But the Mishnah tells us that let's say you have a mikvah shenimda, the mikvah has to have 40 sa, approximately, 160 gallons of water, a lot of water, but enough to really put your whole body in. So this mikvah shenimdad v'nimtza chaser, but after the person goes into the mikvah, they measure the mikvah, and they discover, it's not 40 sa, it's actually 39 sa. So the mikvah was not big enough; it had lost water. So then we're going to say kol taharos shenasu al gabav l'mafreya ben b'rishus ben b'rishus harabim tameo. Said we say then that anything that had gone into that mikvah is going to be tamei. That if you immerse anything to make it tahor, it's tamei. Everything is tamei, and we don't say you get the last 24 hours. So, and we say this is whether it's in the private domain or the public domain. Normally, tuma in the public domain, if it's a suffix, we can be lenient, but in this case, we're going to be strict. So that's what we're saying. Bein b'rishus harabim. That normally we say Rashi says feiko tahor. Here we say it's tamei, because when do we say Rashi says suffix tuma b'rishus harabim tahor? That's only if there's a suffix, whether or not you touched it or you didn't touch it, because then we could say maybe you didn't touch it. But it was certainly tamei, and he came to purify it. Then we're not going to purify you out of a suffix. So that's what Rashi says. Why we don't say that if it's a public domain, we're going to say it's tahor. So we see from here that they argue with him. So the Gemara says, well, pshita de chalukin. Obviously, they argue with him. Why are you even telling us? What's Rebbe Elazar even telling us? And the Gemara says, no, ma'al de tema. You might have said, ma'ilu mafreya. You might have said, what does it mean that everything that he put in there is tamei retroactively? The Gemara says, you might have said, me'es la'es. You might have said after 20, go back 24 hours, and then everything is tamei. So we say Kamash, we don't say that. We say even within those 24 hours, everything going backwards is tamei. Rabbi Yehuda says, Begimel Prakim, Rabbi Yehuda says 3 times a year, you have to check the wine to make sure it's not vinegar. So Gemara says, Tana, Bekidum shal motzei achag shal tkufa. It says that you have to check the during the eastern wind that comes motzei achag. So of the tkufa, what does that mean? Tkufa is the season. So that means Rashi explains in Kvar Nechnas Tkufas Tishrei. That means that's assuming that the Tkufas Tishrei is the fall or the winter season. If that started, but if it's still the summer season, what's called the Tkufas Tammuz, this week is Shabbos Mevarchim. We have Rosh Chodesh on Monday and Tuesday. Tuesday morning, we're going to daven nates. Monday morning, I'm going to daven nates, but I'm going to do it at the special minyan by the ocean in New Jersey, if anybody wants to join me. But the point is that you can't, it's only the eastern wind is only a problem once the fall season starts. That's when you have to check the vinegar, but if the wine for vinegar. But otherwise, if it's still the summer season, you don't have to. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Begimel Prakim Mochornas Atfua Lifnei has 3 times a year you sell the grain. What does that mean? When there are 3 times, Lifnei Hazera, before you start to plant, B'shas Hazera, during the planting of the season. Mean to say that during the time, first is before when people are buying the seed in order to plant, and the second time is at the end of the planting season, that where the people need to buy more seed, and Ubeprosa Pesach, and 15 days before the Pesach holiday. Ubishalosh Prakim, and 3 times a year, Mochornas Ayayin, 3 times a year you sell the wine, Befrosa Pesach, Befrosa Tzeres, Befrosa Chag. 15 days before the holidays, before Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, people need wine for the holidays. Okay, Vishemen and oils is typically sold from Shavuos onward. So the Gemara says, in my Hilchos, why do you have to tell us when you buy stuff, when's the proper season? I mean, come on. So Amarav Vitim Papa was Shutfin. No, it's relevant for partners. Rashi says that typically speaking, a partner cannot sell without the permission, the consent of the other partner. But these 3 times a year, the partner doesn't need to ask. And if he sold it, and then after he sold it, the price of the product went up, the other partner has no claims against him. From this point on, what's the halacha? From that day on, every day is the time to sell. Meaning to say, once you reach that season, they can, of course, sell because that's the time where people expect to buy it. And now the Gemara says, in this context, the Gemara, since it mentioned the eastern wind, the Gemara brings other discussions about this eastern wind. And it says, Vayikizroach Hashemesh, when the sun was shining, Vayaman Elokim Ruach Kadim Charishis, and God prepared a eastern wind that was Charishis. This is about the story of Jonah. Jonah sat up on the hill and he was waiting for God to destroy the city of Nineveh. And God prepared the sun and an eastern wind that was Charishis. What's Charishis? When the wind blows, it makes furrows in the ground that look like waves in the sea. That's how forceful this wind is. So Charishis, what does Charishis mean in this context? Charishis means it's a strong wind. The eastern wind is strong. That doesn't make sense because the next part of that pasuk, the next part of that verse says, "Batach Hashemesh arosh Yonah vayisaraf," that the sun beat down on Jonah's head and he grew faint. So it means that it was very hot and there was no wind. Ela marava, what does it mean? Charishis b'shashem and hasheves mishatekes ko aruchos mipanel. When the wind blows, then all the winds are mishatekes. That all the winds are, Rashi says, chamama od. That all the winds it becomes very hot and it nullifies all the cold of all the winds. When the eastern wind blows, it's a very hot wind. And so therefore the verse calls it the Charishis wind. And this is what it says in the verse in Job, Asher begadecha chamim Shkit eretz midarom, that your garments are hot when the land from the south is hashkit, is quiet, meaning to say, when the southern wind is quiet, so the eastern wind is strong, you're going to be very hot. Call this a chamtzin. Amarav Rabbi Tachlifa Barav Chisa, Rav Chisa, Emasai begadecha chamim. When are your kolas hot? Pesha shashkit eretz midarom. When the wind coming from the south is quiet. Shebesha shemin hasheves mishatekes kol aruchos mipanah. Because when it blows, it quiets down all the winds that are in front of it. So Rashi says, Kishetzinas ruach dromis shoketes, when the cold of the southern wind is quiet. And who quiets down the cold of the southern wind? The eastern wind quiets it down. So because at the time that the east wind blows, then all the other winds are quiet. Rafuna Rav Chisda were sitting down. So this person, his name was Geneva. We already had him earlier in the tractate on Daf Ches. He was a difficult person. He was disrespectful to Mar Ukva. So he was walking in front of Rafuna Rav Chisda. Amar Chad Chavre. So one of them said to the other, Neko Mikmei, should we get up in front of him? Debar Uryan, he's a great Torah scholar. He knows a lot. Amro Idach. So the other one said, Mikmei Palgan Nikum. Should we get up from him? I don't care that he's a Torah scholar. He causes problems. What does Rashi say? Palga, Rashi says, Baal Meriva. He causes a lot of fights. Shahaisalo Meriva and Mar Ukva. He had a big fight with Mar Ukva, Shaya Av Bezdin, who was the Av Bezdin, as we said in the earlier in the tractate on Dav Zayin Amanaf, appears on 7a. Bnei Adam Aom de Malai Ubiyada Lamosra Mamalchus, Vuaya Geneva, Kidmefarish Hasam. So there were people who were standing upon me, and I had the opportunity to give them over to the king, and that was a reference to Geneva. So he was a very difficult person. So we don't care that he knows a lot of Torah. We don't stand up in front of a person who causes a lot of fights. In the meantime, while they were discussing Geneva, while they were discussing this person, Geneva, in the meantime, he came in front of them. He said, what are you talking about? So they said to him, Biruchos, we were just talking about the winds. We were talking about the weather. So there are four winds that blow every day. And the northern wind blows with all of them. If you wouldn't have the northern wind, then the world wouldn't be able to exist even for one moment. And the southern wind is the hardest of all of them. So we had thought that the eastern wind was the hardest, but Geneva is saying that the southern wind is the hardest. And if we're not for this angel who is called the Nates angel, Nates is a hawk, then this southern wind would destroy the whole world. As it says, Hami vinascha yavar, Hami binascha, from your wisdom, Ya'aver Nates Yefroz Knafav Teman. So Ya'aver means to say like his wings, meaning to say, God is asking Job, is it on account of your understanding that the wings of the angel Nates upholds the whole world? Meaning to say, from the south, the wind from the south upholds the whole world. So from the south, the angel Nates is standing there and he stops the wind from destroying the world. Okay, it's a very strange story. What's going on here? I was thinking like this. This is just a thought. Here they are, they're talking about this character, Geneva, and they said, should we stand up for him? He knows a lot of wisdom, but he's a great Torah scholar. But they say, yeah, but he caused a lot of fights, so let's not stand up. Meantime, Nates walks by, he says, what are you talking about? They say, oh, we're just talking about the wind. He says, oh, the wind? The wind there are four winds that blow every day. And if you wouldn't have one of those winds, then the whole world wouldn't be able to stand. you need the northern wind. The northern wind makes everything flow. And so then, and Hashem, and the angel stops the southern wind from destroying the world. So he's saying it's two things. He's saying, first of all, you need all the winds. If your wind is in it, you guys could be the northern wind, that you protect the whole world. And even if you're worried about me, that I'm so strong, don't worry about me. Hashem is going to send a southern angel to stop me. So here is how Geneva is explaining why don't worry too much about him, that he's a negative force in the world. Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak Havayasvi. Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak were sitting down. Havecholaf Azil Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov. So Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov went by the Yosef Bekuharka de Dahava. He was sitting in just one second. I'm finish this. I'll come back to you, Rabbi Yosef. And he was sitting in a golden carriage. Uparasale Sarbala de Karti, and he had this green cloak covering him up. Rabbi Azal Gabe. So Rabbi went to see Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov. He sees, there's a guy from the Reish Galusa. He's a very fancy person. Let me go see who it is. Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak Azal Gabe. He said, Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak didn't want to go to him. He said, maybe he's one of the Reish Galusa. He's one of their people. Rava needs to ingratiate himself with them. But I don't need to ingratiate myself with them. But when he saw that it was actually Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov, he went up to Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov and Goladare, and he uncovered, Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov uncovered his hand. Why did he uncover it? Because the eastern wind was blowing and he was so hot, so he rolled up his sleeves. And Amar, Rav Nachum Bar Yaakov said, Shadia Nafshiv. The carriage is blowing in the wind, meaning to say there's a very hot wind like the wind of the carriage. So Amar Rava Achi Amar Rav Isha Mapelaspo. So Rava said this wind is so strong that it caused a woman to miscarry. Shmuel says, I feel margulish shabiyamar kevaspo. Even the pearls in the sea are going to rot from this eastern wind. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I feel shechva zera shabimei isha miserechespo. Even the seed of a woman's womb, a seed that's in a woman's womb will rot as a result of this. All three of these interpretations about the eastern wind, they're all darshaning the same pasuk. Because the pasuk says, "Kihu bein achim yafri," amongst the brothers will be fruitful. Yavo kadim ruach Hashem. That eastern wind will come, mimidbar oah, will come up from the wilderness, v'yevosh mikoro, will dry out the source, v'yacharav mayano, it'll dry out the spring, hu yishmar otzar kol klichem da, and will guard a treasury, everything that's delightful. So what does this mean? So then they will explain it. Kihu bein achim yafri, amongst the brothers he's being fruitful, yavo kadim ruach Hashem. What do we do with this verse? Yevosh mikoro, the source will dry out. This refers to the woman's womb miscarrying. Zeu mikoro shel isha, a woman's source that will dry out. V'yacharav mayano, and the spring will dry. Zeh shechla zera shemeisha, that refers to the man's seed will rot. And hu yishsa otzer kol kli chamda, this refers to zu margu shabayam, that even the pearls in the sea will rot from this eastern wind. And Amarava Ede Surah Hu Daikikra. It says this teaching came from the people of Surah who really know how to interpret a verse. What do we do with the first words in the pasuk? That even a handle in like a hoe, like a rake, nevertheless that handle will melt. Kufina demara Rafi, it'll get weak. Rav Yosef says, I feel sichta bedafna de Rafi. Even a nail in the wall will get weak. And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, I feel kanya bekufta Rafi. Even a reed in a basket will get weak as a result of this. Hadranolach kol haget. We'll just pause here. Rav Yosef had a question.
Yeah.